I didn't touch this diary for 78 years. It sat in a box under old uniforms that no longer fit the shape of my shoulders, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth that still smells faintly like the sea. My daughter found it when she was sorting through boxes in the attic. She walked downstairs holding it as if she had discovered something sacred. She said, "Dad, this looks important." Important. I laughed when she said that. A small tired laugh, because I knew exactly what it was the moment I saw the stitching on the leather. My hands began to tremble in a way I couldn't control. Not the shaking of old age, no. I have lived with this body long enough to recognize that. This was something deeper, something buried, something that knew. I was 19 when I wrote these pages. 19, I wasn't old enough to buy whiskey, but I was old enough to kill men, and old enough to watch boys I had known since school bleed into foreign sand until the sea pulled them away. I had not read these words since the war ended. I couldn't. I didn't want to see who I was back then. I didn't want to hear the voice of that boy, the one who thought he understood courage. But now, I suppose I'm too old to run from ghosts. My doctor tells me that memory fades. Maybe that's a blessing for some men. But mine didn't fade. Mine sharpened, like the ocean sharpening stones on the shoreline. Every year, the images became clearer, more vivid, more honest. I know why. Because the older you get, the more the past becomes the only thing that still feels real. So, I sit here now, in a quiet room, a window cracked open, a cold breeze brushing against thin skin and old veins. The world outside moves slow. Birds, cars, distant children playing. Life continues, as it always has, as it always will. And in my hands, this diary. The first page is wrinkled, water damaged. I don't have to guess why. I remember the water, the waves, the sound of shells exploding, and the taste of wet sand in my teeth. I remember my hands shaking while I wrote. I wrote because I was afraid that if I didn't, then none of the things I saw would feel real. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't dreaming or dying. The handwriting is small, tight, almost frantic. June 5, 1944. We are on the ship. I can't sleep, the ocean is black. They say tomorrow we land in France. I keep thinking of Mum's hands, so I stop reading. My throat tightens. The boy who wrote that line still believed he would go home and see his mother setting the dinner table. He still believed in the idea of tomorrow. I touch the ink with my fingertips. The ink does not know that the boy didn't stay 19 for long. I turn the page. June 6, 1944, 04:21. They woke us. They said this was it. I tried to tie my boots, but my fingers wouldn't work. The sergeant slapped me on the back and said, "Breathe, kid. The water looks calm. That feels wrong." I remember that morning with a clarity that frightens me. Not the heroism, not the speeches, just the sound. The engines were loud, but inside that sound, there was another silence. An enormous silence. The kind that only exists when thousands of men are waiting to die, and not one of them wants to say the words out loud. Nobody spoke, nobody dared. Even the ones who tried to act tough, they stared at the floor. Boots, laces, rifles, hands. All of us were children pretending. The sky was grey, a dull kind of grey that makes you feel like the world itself is holding its breath. When the shoreline appeared, I remember thinking that it looked peaceful, like a place where families might have picnics. Then the first shell hit, a sound like the air itself cracking apart. The boat shook. Someone crossed themselves. Someone else vomited onto the floor. And then another shell. And another. Until there were no more thoughts, just instinct. Just the brutal simplicity of survival. The diary continues. I'm scared. God, I'm scared, but I don't want the others to see it. I keep my face still. If I break, someone else will break. And then we'll all drown before the bullets even touch us. I close my eyes. I can still feel the wet of my uniform, the weight of the gear, the water up to my chest when we finally jumped, the waves pulling at us, trying to claim us before the enemy could. Men screamed, not war cries, screams like animals caught in traps. The boy I was wrote, "There is no glory, there is no music, just chaos, just terror." I thought I would be brave, but bravery feels like something that exists only in stories told far away from the smell of blood and the sound of bones breaking in water. I remember the first body that floated past me. His helmet was gone. His eyes were open. He looked surprised, not angry, not afraid, Just surprised that the world could stop for him so fast. I think about him often, more than I think about the ones I knew, because he was the first, and the first always stays. The diary ends that page with 5 words. I don't want to die. Reading that now, as a man who lived past 90, I feel guilty. Guilty that the boy who wrote it survived when so many did not. Guilty that I got to grow old. Guilty that I am here, breathing, remembering, while they are still 19. Their bodies young forever, trapped beneath foreign shores. I take a long breath. My hands are steady now. I turn the page. I remember the water before I remember the gunfire. Cold, heavier than I expected. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but the kind that enters you, that makes your bones feel hollow. When we jumped from the landing craft, the sea rose up to my chest, and I thought for a moment that it would swallow me whole. My pack dragged me down. My rifle nearly slipped from my hands. The weight of everything I carried suddenly felt like a mistake. I heard someone shout, "Drop your pack," but if I had dropped it, I would have been useless the moment I made land. So, I kicked, hard, harder than I ever had in my life. I felt like an animal struggling in a trap. Panic is loud when it's inside your skull, but outside, everything was louder. The first bullets didn't sound real. They cracked over the water, like someone snapping twigs. But then, they hit men, and the sound changed. Flesh makes a sound when it's torn open, a sound you don't forget, a sound that becomes a stain inside your memory, a stain that spreads, year after year, even long after the war is over. The diary reads, "The water tastes like salt and iron. The waves keep splashing blood on my lips. I don't know if it's mine. One of the boys from my town is ahead of me. I yell his name, but he doesn't turn. He's focused. I try to be. I don't think it's working. I remember his name now. His name was Paul Redding. He liked baseball. He used to talk about it every night on the ship. He told me the girls back home liked his swing. He didn't even make it 10 steps off the boat. A round hit him high in the chest. He looked confused. He dropped the rifle, then he just folded into the sea, like someone had let the air out of him. I reached for him. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Maybe love, maybe denial. My hand brushed his sleeve for just a second before another wave carried him away. I didn't have time to mourn him. The beach demanded movement. If you stopped moving, you didn't get to keep breathing. The diary continues. I don't know who I am right now. I don't feel like the boy who left home. I don't feel like the man they said I had to become. I feel like something in between, something unfinished, something the ocean is still carving. We ran, as much as a man can run through heavy water and chaos. I could hear the machine guns clearer now. They were positioned high. The Germans knew exactly what they were doing. They had angles, elevation, perfect lines of fire. We were ants crawling up an open field of death. Someone screamed for a medic. Someone else prayed out loud. I slipped on something beneath the waves. I didn't look to see what it was. I couldn't. I wouldn't have moved again if I did. My boots finally hit sand, the real kind. Not the soft beach sand you feel on vacation, but coarse, heavy sand that sticks to your blood and your sweat and turns your skin into mud. Men were dropping all around me, but the thing I remember most, the thing that still wakes me in the night, is the smell. Burning oil, explosives, wet fabric, salt, and underneath all of it, blood. Blood has a smell that is metallic and sweet and rotten all at once. It clings to the back of your throat. You breathe it, you swallow it. And you know, instinctively, without thinking, that something about the world has changed forever. In the diary, I wrote, I see a boy trying to push another boy's intestines back inside his belly. He keeps saying, hold on, brother, hold on. But the boy he's talking to is already dead. His eyes are open, staring at the sky. I look away. I know I shouldn't. I know I should help him, but I can't. I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. Maybe no one was. Shells hit the beach in clusters. Sand exploded in fountains. The air itself felt sharp. And every time I blinked, I saw new bodies. The boy I was wrote, war is not glory. War is not courage. War is not honor. War is a machine made of teeth, and we are the meat it grinds. I didn't know where to go. The orders were drowned in gunfire and screaming. The lieutenant was shouting something, but his voice kept disappearing behind the explosions. All I could do was crawl. I dug my fingernails into the sand. I kept my head low. My helmet rattled every time a bullet struck it or struck near it. The sound felt like being tapped on the skull by death's fingers. Somewhere behind me, someone shouted my name. Or maybe I imagined it. I don't know. The only thing I remember clearly is the moment I realized I didn't want to be brave anymore. I just wanted to live. The diary ends that page with a single line. God, please let me live. Not for glory, not for country, not for history. Just to breathe again. Just to see another sunrise. Just to be 19 for one more day. I look at those words now, written in shaky ink, soaked by seawater and fear, and I feel something I can't fully name. Shame, maybe, or grief, or love for that terrified boy who was doing the best he could. The old say that time heals. They lie. Time doesn't heal, it buries. And sometimes, like today, something digs it back up. There is a moment in every battle when the world becomes very small. Not the whole day, not the entire beach, just one moment, one image that stays with you for the rest of your life. For me, that moment was Tommy Reeves. Tommy was from Ohio, 17 when he enlisted, lied about his age, said he wanted to be a man. He still had freckles on his cheeks. We slept on the same bunk row on the transport ship. He always fell asleep fastest, like a child. No tension in him, no hesitation, just trust. I used to envy that. When we hit the sand that morning, Tommy was right beside me, or he was supposed to be. The diary says, I lost sight of Reeves in the surf, but then I heard him screaming. Not words, just screaming. I turn and he's down, not dead, just down. Trying to get up, but the water keeps pushing him forward and back. I can still see it, the waves shoving him over and over, like the ocean couldn't decide whether to take him or return him. The gunfire didn't pause. The world didn't stop because one boy was struggling. I crawled toward him, not out of bravery, out of something smaller, something helpless and instinctive, something like, if he dies and I stay alive, I will never forgive myself. The sand was slick with blood. I remember my palms sliding through it. Warm. That's the detail that haunts me the most. The warmth. Even now my hands sometimes remember it. Tommy's leg was torn open. Shrapnel. A jagged hole. Meat and fabric and seawater mixing into one raw thing. He clawed at me when I reached him. His fingers dug into my coat, my neck. He didn't want help. He wanted not to be alone. There's a difference. In the diary, I wrote, he keeps saying, don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me. He says it like a machine gun. The words never stop. I tell him I won't. I tell him I promise. I don't know if that's true. We tried to crawl. The sand turned red under us as we moved, like we were dragging a paintbrush across the beach. Bullets hit the ground inches from my face. Sand flew into my eyes. I couldn't see for seconds that felt like minutes. Tommy was crying, not the dramatic kind. Silent tears. The kind you only hear because they shake the breath. He looked at me and said, I don't want to die. Every soldier says that. But the way he said it, like a child confessing something shameful, it broke something in me. I pulled him behind a steel obstacle, one of those iron crosses the Germans had scattered across the beach to tear landing craft apart. It gave us maybe 6 inches of cover. Not enough, never enough. The diary says, he tries to hold his leg closed with his hands. He keeps apologizing. I don't know why. He says, tell my mum I tried. He says her name again and again. I do not know her, but I know the way he says it. We stayed there, 2 boys hiding beneath death. I pressed a bandage to his leg, but the blood wouldn't stop. It just kept coming, like the ocean itself was inside him. I don't know how long we stayed there. Minutes, hours, time lost meaning. Everything became breath, pressure on the wound, sand in my teeth, the taste of copper in the air. A shell exploded close enough to lift us off the ground. My ears rang. The world became silent, not quiet, but silent, like the sound had been ripped from existence. When I opened my eyes, Tommy was staring at me, but this time he was calm, too calm. The diary says he looks peaceful now, like the screaming has moved somewhere else. He reached for my hand. He squeezed it once, not fear, not panic, just goodbye. His lips moved. I leaned in, thinking he would whisper something important, something final, something I would carry like a message, a mission, a duty. But he only said, thank you, and then he was gone. No drama, no collapse, just a soft exhale, a breath he didn't take back in. For years afterward, I dreamed of that exhale. I would wake up gasping, as if I needed to inhale for both of us. I don't remember getting up from that spot. I don't remember crawling away. I don't remember reaching the seawall where others regrouped. All I remember is the weight in my chest. A weight I still carry even now, even here, with old bones and shaking hands and a lifetime between me and that beach. The diary ends that section with 3 sentences written in handwriting, almost carved into the paper. If I live, if I make it home, I will remember him. People think the hardest part of war is the fighting. It isn't. The hardest part is remembering, because remembering means they stay dead and you stay alive, and you have to figure out how to live with that. I close the diary. I look at the room around me, quiet, safe, the kind of life Tommy never had the chance to grow into. I whisper his name aloud, not to mourn him, not to honour him, but to keep him real, because the moment I stop remembering is the moment he dies a second time. There are moments in life when distance becomes a cruel illusion. On that morning, the beach looked close. From the ship, it looked like a short run, a sprint, something any young man could cross in less than a minute. But that was the lie of it. The sand stretched forever. Every step forward felt stolen. Every inch gained felt paid for with a life. The diary reads, "The beach keeps moving away from us. It's right there. But no matter how hard we push, it stays far. Like running in a dream when your legs won't move." And it was true. We crawled like worms through hell. Men who had never prayed before whispered God's name into the dirt. Men who talked tough back in the barracks sobbed into their sleeves. Men who believed themselves immortal learned the truth the hard way. There were no heroes on that beach, only survivors. And survivors are just those who got lucky. I remember gripping my rifle like it was the only thing anchoring me to the world. The metal was slick. Salt water mixed with sweat made my hands raw. My knuckles were white and trembling. I remember the sand hitting my teeth every time a round struck inches from my face. Sand hurts when it's moving fast enough. It cuts like glass. I can still feel the grit embedded in the lines of my palms, like memory etched into skin. The diary says, "I keep my head down. If I lift it, I die. If I breathe wrong, I die. If I freeze, I die. The only choice is to move." There is no bravery in that, no courage, just math. Move, maybe live, stop, die. Simple, sir. A man ahead of me tried to stand. He didn't make it to his feet. His helmet flew off. His body fell like a puppet whose strings had snapped. No sound, just collapse. I didn't even know his name. Isn't that strange? That a person's entire life, every memory, every dream, every person he ever loved, can disappear into the sand without anyone even saying his name? War doesn't care who you are. It only cares how small you become when the world starts tearing itself apart. The diary continues. The machine guns don't stop. They sweep the beach like they're wiping dirt from a table. We are the dirt. I remember looking up and seeing the cliffs, seeing where they were firing from. High ground, concrete bunkers, lines of fire overlapping like they were drawn on a map. We were never supposed to make it. Looking back now, as an old man, I can see the strategy, the planning, the brutal efficiency of it. But the boy I was, he only saw death. And yet, we moved. Not because of orders, not because of patriotism, not because of glory, but because stopping meant being swallowed by the tide of bodies behind us. There is a truth about war that no movie, no speech, no historian tells. Most men move forward because they don't want to be crushed by the dead behind them. It is not noble. It is not noble at all. We reached the shingle, a line of rocks and debris piled by the tide. It offered a sliver of cover, not enough to feel safe, just enough to breathe without tasting your own fear. Men gathered there, some wounded, some whole, some crying, some too quiet. Shock has faces. I learnt them that day. One man sat with his hands in his lap, staring at them, as if confused they belonged to him. Another laughed and laughed and laughed until he passed out. Someone kept calling for their brother, even though their brother wasn't there. I remember my hands shaking as I reloaded. I remember failing twice before I managed to seat the magazine. I remember thinking, I should not be here. I am not ready for this. I am just a boy. But war does not wait for readiness. You learn fast, or you die fast. The diary says, the lieutenant crawls down the line. We can't hear him well. The guns drown him out, but I understand the signal. We move to the seawall. one at a time, short bursts. If you run too long, you die. The seawall felt miles away. Men did not run in straight lines. They zigzagged, ducked, fell, crawled, rolled, anything to make themselves a harder target. I watched 3 fall before I made my move. My legs didn't feel like mine. They moved on their own with a kind of desperate rhythm, arms pumping, sand exploding around me, the world becoming a blur. And then I hit the wall, not gracefully. I slammed into it hard enough to knock the wind out of my chest. My helmet rattled, I gasped. And then, for a moment, there was shelter. Thin shelter, fragile shelter, but shelter. More joined me, more dropped before reaching us. The wall filled with the sounds of men dying. If you have never heard a man die, really die, it's not a sound you can imagine. It is not one scream, it is not one cry. It is layers, gasps that sound like drowning in air, gurgling where blood replaces breath, soft moans as though the body is trying to keep itself here, and sometimes silence, the worst of all. The diary ends this entry with, "I don't want to look anymore, I don't want to listen anymore, but I do, because the world won't look away, and neither can I." Back then I thought surviving was the hard part. I was wrong. The hard part is remembering, and I remember everything. The sand, the water, the bodies, the sound of death in waves. The beach never ended. Not that day. Not for 78 years. Not even now. This is the part I never wanted to tell anyone. Not my wife. Not my children. Not the priests who asked if I wished to confess. Not even myself in the quiet rooms of my memory. But if I am going to open this diary, if I am going to speak honestly, then I have to tell this too. The diary begins this section with a short line. I did not want to do it. We had finally reached the seawall. Gunfire still shredded the air above our heads. Explosions shook the ground. The smell of burnt metal and human fear clung to the back of my throat. The lieutenant was shouting orders. I could see his mouth move, but the words came scrambled through the ringing in my ears. What I do remember is this. We had to move. We had to push forward. If we stayed pinned under that seawall, we would be buried there. Someone yelled that the gun nest had to be taken out. Not by planes, not by tanks, by us, the boys pinned behind the wall. I was chosen, not because I was brave, but because I was young, light, fast. Still got your legs, the lieutenant said. Still got my legs. As if that was all a man needed to do something impossible. We crawled, 3 of us, along the wall, then into a trench blown open by mortar fire. The trench smelled like mud and blood and cordite. The walls were slick with something I didn't want to think about. The diary says, my hands won't stop shaking. The knife feels heavy. The gun feels distant. I don't want to use either. We moved inch by inch. The world was narrowed to the dirt in front of my face. My helmet bumped the ground with every breath. I could hear the machine gun ahead. A steady mechanical roar. Fast, precise, uncaring. The thing about a machine gun nest is that you don't see the men inside it until you're almost on top of them. I reached the edge. I could hear their voices, German, calm, measured, talking as if they were on a break, like the killing was a job, a routine. Maybe it was. The boy I was wrote, I didn't want to kill them. I didn't hate them. I didn't even know them. They were just men. I wish I could tell you I hesitated longer, that I wrestled with morality, that I questioned what I was doing. But the truth is simpler and worse. If I didn't kill them, they would keep killing us. So I pulled the pin. The grenade felt light, lighter than fear, lighter than guilt. I tossed it into the nest and pressed my face into the dirt. There was a crack, a flash, a sound like the world inhaling and choking at the same time. When I climbed into the bunker, the first man I saw wasn't dead yet. He was burned, his uniform charred, his face, I won't describe it. I don't want those details to stain your dreams the way they stain mine. But he was looking at me. He was looking at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. His hand twitched, reaching for something. Maybe a gun, maybe nothing. Maybe he was just reaching for home. I shot him, once. The recoil buckled my shoulder. The diary says only this. He was young. That was the part that broke me. He wasn't some monster. Not a faceless enemy. Not a villain from a story told to make us feel righteous. He was a young man, like me, and I took everything he ever was or ever would be. People always ask the same question when they hear about war. Did you feel proud? Proud, her? No, there was no pride, only silence. The silence that comes after the roar of violence. The silence where the world waits to see what kind of man you are now. I stood there shaking. Not because I was afraid, because I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I had become a man who could kill, a man who did kill. War doesn't just destroy bodies, it changes souls. It takes a boy and turns him into something else. Something harder, something colder, something that doesn't fit in the ordinary world anymore. Even when I came home, even when I held my child for the first time, even when I sat at dinner tables and pretended everything was normal, that part of me was still there. The part that killed to survive. People say war ends, but it doesn't. It stays in your hands, in your ears, in your dreams, in the quiet moments you try to fill with small talk. In the mirror, when you recognize the eyes but not the man behind them. The diary ends this section with the smallest handwriting in the entire book. I don't know who I am now. After 78 years, I still don't think I have an answer. We moved up the hill because there was nowhere else to go. The sea was behind us, full of bodies, and the sky was above us, full of fire. Forward was the only direction left in the world. I remember the slope being steeper than it looked from the water. The sand gave way under our boots, every step slipping back half the distance we gained. Men were crawling, dragging themselves, some without rifles, some without helmets, some without hope. The machine guns still swept across the beach, but now we were beneath their line of fire. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It only meant new dangers waited ahead. Mines, snipers, mortars, whatever they had prepared for us. We didn't have the luxury of thinking about details. We only followed the man in front of us, whoever he was, because pausing meant stopping and stopping meant dying. The diary says, "My ears are still ringing. It feels like the world is underwater. I only hear my own breathing. That ringing followed me for years. Even now, if I close my eyes in a quiet room, I can hear it. I suppose my body never forgot the sound of the guns." There was a man ahead of me named Hughes. I didn't know him well. We'd only spoken twice, once about home, once about what we would eat when the war was over. He said he wanted pancakes. I told him I wanted a cold beer. Small dreams, the kind men make when they're trying not to think about dying. Hughes stepped onto a patch of grass near a broken piece of concrete. There was a click, a sound light and sharp, like a switch being turned on, and then he was gone. Not thrown, not shattered, just gone. The mine took the middle of him. Clean, brutal, instantaneous. His helmet rolled to my feet. I stared at it for too long. Someone behind me screamed at me to move. I didn't even remember moving my legs, but somehow I was further up the hill a moment later. The diary continues. I feel hollow. I don't know where the sadness is supposed to go. There's no room for it here. If I feel it now, I die. War teaches you to grieve later, much later, sometimes 50 years later, sometimes never. We reached a patch of broken ground where the grass had been burned black. The smell was stronger here. Burned fuel, burned cloth, burned flesh. There is no mistaking that smell once you've known it. I still smell it sometimes, faint, like memory has its own scent. Men were crouching behind shattered chunks of concrete, catching their breath in fast, shocked gulps. Some touched their chests to make sure they were still whole. Some laughed in a way that didn't sound human. And some stared ahead with eyes that had already seen too much. The lieutenant crawled to us. He had blood on his face, but I don't know if it was his. He pointed up the hill toward a nest dug into the hillside. "We take that," he said. His voice was steady. It shouldn't have been. He should have been shaking like the rest of us. But he wasn't. I remember thinking he looked like a man who had already died inside and was just waiting for his body to follow. I didn't know then that this was the look of leadership in war. A man who carries the weight of sending others to die and knows it. The diary says, "I don't feel brave, I feel numb. Maybe numb is what bravery really is." I think that was the first time I ever understood that fear doesn't disappear, it just gets quieter. We moved in a staggered line, each of us taking quick bursts from one shattered piece of cover to another. Bullets snapped past us, hitting stone and dirt. When a bullet hits stone at close range, it sends out sparks. It looks like fireflies. I still think of that sometimes, how something so deadly could look almost beautiful. There was a scream behind me. I didn't turn. Turning was dangerous. You learn that quickly. You learn that screams are not commands. Screams mean someone is already gone. When we reached a ditch near the top of the slope, we were close enough to hear the Germans shouting to each other again. Not angry, not panicked, just communicating. Efficient, practiced. Men who had done this before, We waited for a signal. The lieutenant raised his hand. I knew what that meant. We were going to rush the nest. There was no other way. No precision. No clever strategy. Just bodies thrown at steel until one side ran out. Before we moved, a boy next to me whispered, "Tell me I'll be okay." He was so young. So young. I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he came from. I didn't know who he loved or who loved him. But he looked at me like I had answers. Like I could bless him. Like I could save him. I told him, "You will." I lied. We charged. Time didn't slow. Time didn't speed up. Time disappeared. There was only movement. Feet pounding dirt, breath burning lungs, arms heavy with the weight of the rifle. The world blurred into sound and heat and violence. The man next to me was shot in the side and folded like a piece of paper. Someone else tripped and didn't get up. I reached the wall of the nest and threw another grenade. This one exploded differently. A deeper sound, a closer impact. My ears rang again. When I climbed inside, I didn't think, I didn't feel, I didn't reason. I just fired. Movement meant target. Target meant death. That was the logic of the moment. When it was over, the nest was quiet. Smoke hung low. The bodies didn't look like people anymore. They looked like things the earth had rejected. I remember stepping back, breathing hard, my hands slick with sweat, dirt and something else. My mind felt far away, like I was watching someone else live inside my body. The diary ends the entry with one sentence. We took the hill, but I think it took something from us too. It took something I never got back. After we took the hill, there was no triumph. No cheering, no shouts of victory, just breathing. Heavy, uneven, stunned breathing. The kind that comes from a body that survived something it wasn't designed to survive. The ground was torn apart, grass burned to ash, dirt thrown open like a wound. The machine gun nest was nothing but broken wood, twisted metal, and the still shapes of men who would never get up again. Some of ours, some of theirs, all equal in the way death equalizes. The diary says, "Silence is worse than noise. In noise there is motion, purpose. In silence there is thought." And thinking was the danger. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering meant understanding. Understanding meant breaking. A medic passed by us, not looking at anyone in particular, just scanning for movement. He touched one man on the shoulder. The man didn't move. He moved on. He tapped another. That one groaned, so he knelt beside him. That's how life and death were decided that day. A tap, a response, or none. I watched a man named Carter sit down on a piece of shattered stone. Carter was older than most of us, maybe 30. Married, a child back home. He had a picture of them in his breast pocket. He used to look at it every night before lights out. He was quiet, solid, dependable. But now he sat with his hands open on his knees, palms up, eyes fixed on the ground. No wounds, no blood, no visible injury, just emptied, like something inside him had cracked and spilled out where no one could see it. Another soldier asked if he was okay. Carter didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't blink, just stared. The medic came by, checked him, then whispered to the lieutenant. Shock. But shock is too small a word. Carter wasn't shocked. He was gone. His body was still there. His eyes were still open. But the man he had been, the one who laughed, who carried pictures, who had a future, had left. The diary says, "I don't know how to help him. I don't know how to help any of us." That's the truth no training manual ever mentions. You don't just lose lives in war. You lose pieces of the living. Pieces that never return. We regrouped near a stone farmhouse that had already been abandoned long before we reached it. Probably shelled early. Roof collapsed, walls cracked, windows blown out. It didn't look like a house anymore. It looked like a corpse of a home. Smoke drifted from the upper beams. The smell of burned wood mixed with the smell of burned meat. I didn't ask which had been burned first. I didn't want the answer. Inside, we found German rations. Canned bread, hard crackers, some sausage that smelled like rust. We ate anyway. Hunger ignores disgust. The taste didn't matter. Chewing meant living. Swallowing meant moving forward. That was enough. The lieutenant tried to speak to us. He had a map, a pencil, a voice that sounded like gravel. He told us we would move again soon. Some men nodded, some stared, some didn't react. He spoke as if we were still soldiers, as if we hadn't left parts of ourselves across the sand and up that hill. When he finished, a boy, maybe 18, named Daniels, stood up and walked a few steps away from the group. He leaned his back against what remained of a wall and slid down to the ground. Then he started shaking. Not crying, not gasping, just shaking, his whole body trembling like he was freezing in the middle of summer. His rifle slipped from his hands. I sat down beside him. I didn't know him well. I didn't know what to say. We had no language for this. No one had taught us how to talk about fear without sounding weak. No one told us that every man on that beach felt the same terror. He whispered, "I thought I was ready. I thought I could handle this. I thought..." His voice broke. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a small fracture in sound, like a twig snapping underfoot. I didn't tell him it would be okay. It wouldn't. I didn't tell him he was strong. Strength didn't matter. I didn't tell him we would make it. No one knew that. I just said, "I know," and he nodded. Sometimes the only real comfort in war is knowing someone else is breaking too. The diary reads, "I think the breaking happens one layer at a time. The first layer is fear. The second is grief. The third is understanding. The fourth is acceptance. I don't know what comes after acceptance. Maybe nothing." We slept that night in shifts, if you could call it sleep. I lay with my back against a cold wall, and my helmet tilted over my eyes. I kept my rifle across my chest. I don't remember dreaming. I don't remember resting. I only remember darkness and the sound of breathing around me. Men breathed differently after battle. Quick, shallow, uneven breaths, like their lungs were still trying to escape their bodies. At some point I woke to someone sobbing quietly, the kind of crying done into a sleeve or a shirt collar to keep it hidden. I didn't look to see who it was. It didn't matter. Any of us could have been the one crying. All of us probably did at some point, just never when the others were watching. Pride survived even where innocence didn't. Before dawn, the lieutenant shook us awake, his voice low. "We move in 5. No speeches, no promises, no mention of yesterday." Yesterday was already another lifetime. We stood, we lifted our rifles, we formed up again. 1 man short, 2 wounded, 3 less souls inside the rest of us. The diary ends the entry with one line. "The world does not care that we are breaking. The world only cares that we keep going." We did, because there was nothing else to do. We moved inland as the sun came up. The light was thin, grey, and tired looking, like even the sky had seen too much already. The air was damp, the grass wet. Our boots left dark prints that filled slowly with muddy water. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't hurt to hear. The first village we reached wasn't a place anymore, just shapes, ruins. The suggestion of lives that had existed once. Stone walls blown open, roofs collapsed inward, doors hanging from single hinges, swinging in the breeze like weak gestures of resistance. Wind passed through empty windows and made a hollow sound, like a breath taken by someone trying very hard not to cry. The diary says, "No bodies. That's worse." And it was. Bodies mean finality. Bodies mean answers. But a village with no people at all. That means something happened that we were too late to stop. We moved slow, rifles ready, eyes scanning every window, every doorway, every shadow thick enough to hide a muzzle. The silence was heavier here than on the beach. On the beach there had been screams, explosions, gunfire. Noise holds meaning. This silence did not. This silence felt like a grave that stretched beyond the horizon. There were animals still. A chicken wandering between rubble, a horse tied to a post, ribs showing, eyes dull. Life lingering without understanding why it should continue. We saw a well in the centre of the village. The stones around it were stained dark. I didn't ask what that stain was. No one did. We all knew. We had seen enough to understand without speaking. A corporal checked one of the houses. He stepped inside and came out quickly, his face pale and frozen. He didn't say what he saw. He didn't have to. We all walked past that house without looking in. The diary continues. War is not only where men die, war is where the world dies around them. We found signs that the villagers had been gathered. Footprints in the dirt, drag marks, a broken bracelet, a child's wooden toy burned halfway through. The kind of details that should be small, but instead hit the chest like a hammer. One of the younger soldiers, Fisher, stopped walking. He stared at that toy for too long. His breathing changed. I could hear it, sharp and thin. I thought he was going to scream, but he didn't. He just knelt down and picked up the toy. His hand shook as he held it. Then he set it down again. Carefully, gently, like returning a baby to sleep. And then he stood up and kept marching. That is war. Not the big moments. Not the battles or the maps or the speeches. War is a man holding a burned toy and choosing not to break. We found supplies inside what had been a bakery. Flour scattered across the floor, mixing with ash and dust to make a grey, lifeless powder. Someone had carved a date into the wall. Just a date, nothing else. A moment frozen, a reminder that time continued, even while lives didn't. We rested there, in the shell of what once fed families. Bread ovens cold, tables overturned, crumbs still on plates. I looked at those crumbs for a long time, imagining hands that had held them, imagining laughter that had once filled this space, imagining warmth and the ordinary rhythm of life, then imagining the moment it ended. The lieutenant told us we would move again soon, that there were reports of German patrols nearby, that we needed to secure the crossroads to continue the push inland. But before we left, an old woman appeared. She came from behind a collapsed wall, walking slowly, carefully, like each step was a decision. Her clothes were torn, her hair grey and tangled, her eyes, I will never forget her eyes. They were not afraid, they were not pleading, they were empty. Empty in a way that no sound, no scream, no prayer could reach. We raised our rifles on instinct. She did not react. She only looked at us like we were ghosts. The diary says she saw through us, as if she recognized we were already halfway dead. She said something in French, soft, slow, quiet enough that we had to lean closer to hear. She said, "They took everything. No tears, no trembling, just truth. Not shouted, not dramatic, just spoken by someone who no longer expected help to exist in the world." She pointed toward us woods beyond the village. We didn't need translation. We knew what everything meant. We started moving again. The village grew smaller behind us, swallowed by distance. But the silence stayed, followed, sat on our shoulders like weight that would never leave. And then came the sound. Not explosions, not gunfire, just sobbing. At first I thought it was the old woman, or someone wounded, but it was closer, right beside me. It was Daniels, the boy who had asked me to tell him he'd be okay. His rifle was shaking in his hands, his shoulders shaking too. He was trying to choke the sound back down, bury it, suffocate it. But grief doesn't suffocate, it claws its way out. He dropped to his knees. No one touched him. No one told him to stop, no one told him to get up. The lieutenant just looked at him with eyes that had seen this before, eyes that understood that a man breaks slowly first, then suddenly. The diary ends the entry like this. I heard the sound of a man breaking today, and I knew it was the same sound inside me. We did not comfort him. We could not, because we were breaking too. And there is no room for broken men to carry each other when the war is still moving. We moved into the tree line because open ground was death. The forest wasn't safety, just a different kind of danger. The kind where every shadow could be an enemy and every sound could be a trap. The ground was soft with pine needles. The air smelled of sap and damp earth. It should have been peaceful. Forests are supposed to be peaceful, but this one felt wrong. The trees stood tall and silent, like they were watching us, judging us, mourning us. We spread out, rifles raised, eyes scanning. Training took over. Not courage, not instinct. Just repetition burned deep enough to operate without thought. We moved like ghosts through the branches, not speaking, not asking, not thinking too loudly. The diary says, we don't talk now. Talking feels dangerous, like it will attract something waiting just out of sight. And it did. Sound carries differently in woods. Too far, too close, hard to know direction, harder to know intent. We found tracks first, boots, fresh, not ours. German patrol, maybe 5 or 6 men, maybe more, doesn't matter. A patrol is a patrol, A threat is a threat. We followed. Not because we wanted to, because the war demanded it, because leaving an armed enemy behind us meant death later. We moved slow, careful, every step placed deliberately, every breath measured, no snapped twigs, no loose rocks. We were no longer boys by then. We were predators, not heroes, not liberators, just hunters with hollow eyes. We saw the Germans before they saw us. They were resting near a fallen log, helmets off, faces tired, young, too young. One smoked a cigarette, exhaling slowly, like a man trying to feel human for a moment. Another sharpened a knife. One sat with his head in his hands. They looked like us, exactly like us. There is no difference in fear when both sides are dying. The lieutenant signalled. Silent hand movement, simple, brutal. We kill them. The boy I had been on the ship was gone. The boy who cried over Tommy was fading. The boy who hesitated in the bunker had died already. What remained was something leaner, colder, efficient. We circled them. The forest helped us. Pine and shadow, moss and silence, the kind of silence that holds blood well. The diary says, I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not hatred, just necessity. That's the part people at home never understand. You don't kill because you want to. You kill because if you don't, the men beside you die. And if they die, their ghosts sit behind your eyes forever. We struck fast, no shouting, no warning. Gunfire would bring others. Knives, bayonets, rope hands. I came behind one, the one with the cigarette. He was just turning his head when my arm went around his throat. He dropped the cigarette. It fell into the pine needles and burned a tiny red dot on the forest floor. I remember that dot. I remember thinking how small fire is before it becomes disaster. His hands clawed at mine. His boots kicked the dirt. His breath came ragged. I felt the life inside him struggle. Then weaken, then fade. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. That scared me more than the killing itself. The diary continues. It was quiet, too quiet. A human life should make more noise when it leaves the world, but it doesn't. Death is almost always quiet. Not the movie kind, not the story kind, just quiet. When it was done, we checked their pockets. Not for trophies, for information. Maps, notes, orders, rations. A photograph fell from one man's coat. A young woman holding a baby, smiling, the edges worn from being handled too often. I stared at it too long. Long enough for my chest to remember itself. Long enough for my humanity to flicker like a weak candle in wind. I put the photo back in his pocket. I don't know why. Maybe so the world wouldn't lose the only thing left of him. We hid the bodies in the underbrush, covered them with branches, leaves, dirt. The forest would finish the rest. Time is efficient at erasing what war leaves behind. The lieutenant didn't thank us. There was nothing to thank. This was just the work now, the rhythm, the routine. We moved again before the birds returned to the trees. As we walked, I looked at the men beside me. Their eyes were different now. Focused, narrow. Not seeing the world, but scanning it. Not thinking, only evaluating. Threat, not threat. Kill, not kill. Live, die. It is frightening how fast the mind can convert. The diary says, we learned how to kill quietly today. I think that means we are losing whatever part of us was still human. And I agreed then. But I understand something now, 78 years later. We did not lose our humanity, we buried it, deep, where it could not interfere, where it would not get us killed, where it could wait until the war was over. If the war ever ended. That night we slept in the forest, no fire, just darkness. I lay awake staring at the branches above me. The stars were there, but dim, like they too were hiding. I thought of the cigarette ember, the photo in the coat, the sound of a man's last breath, the weight of a war inside the chest of a boy. And for the first time, I understood. The war was not something happening around us. The war was something growing inside us, something that would not die just because we survived. Night in wartime is not darkness. It is awareness. It is waiting. It is listening to every sound with a kind of fear that sits under the ribs, like something alive. People think the dark hides you. It doesn't. It exposes you. Because when sight disappears, your thoughts get loud, your memories get loud. The things you tried to bury start scratching at the inside of your skull. We made camp in a shallow dip in the woods. No fire, no whispering, no shifting of gear unless absolutely necessary. Every movement had to be deliberate, purposeful. The forest was a breathing thing around us, and we had to remain quieter than it to stay alive. The diary says, "We are trying to rest, but rest does not come." And that is the closest I have ever seen words come to describing what it felt like. I remember lying on my back, helmet under my head, watching the tree branches sway. They looked like hands, reaching, grasping, searching for something just out of reach. The stars were barely visible through the canopy. A few small lights scattered across a black sky. They flickered in and out of view, as if the world was blinking slowly. No one talked. Talking would have released the pressure. And if the pressure released, everything inside us might spill out. Fear, grief, shock, horror, disbelief. It all built up under the skin. You couldn't let it escape. Not then. Not in front of others. So we held it tight. I remember Carter, the man who had gone silent on the hill, sitting with his back against a tree. His eyes stared straight ahead. He didn't blink often, sometimes not for minutes. His rifle rested across his knees, but his hands didn't move. They didn't twitch. They didn't clench. They just rested, still, too still. I watched him for a long time. The others did too. No one said a word to him, not because we didn't care, but because we did. Because none of us had anything useful to say. What words are there for a man who has seen too much in one day to understand any of it? The diary continues. I don't know how to sleep with the war still happening inside my head. And that was the truth. Sleep didn't come, rest didn't come, only exhaustion. A heavy, relentless exhaustion that lived in the bones and made the body feel like stone. Sometime deep into the night, I heard someone whispering. Soft, shaking. I couldn't see who. The words came in pieces. A prayer. Maybe, or maybe just a memory being repeated, trying to keep something alive inside the speaker. Then there was a scream. Not loud, but sharp. The kind that cuts through the dark like a blade. We were on our feet instantly, rifles up, hearts pounding, eyes searching for movement, shadows, figures. But there was no enemy. No attack. It was Daniels, the youngest among us, the boy who had shaken in the ruined village, the one who had asked me to tell him he'd be okay. He knelt on the ground, hands pressed to his ears, shaking violently. His breath came hard and fast, like he was drowning in the air. I reached him first. I put my hand on his shoulder. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing the forest. He was seeing the beach, the bodies, the blood in the waves. The boy we couldn't save. The boy he couldn't save. The one whose name I still say sometimes in my sleep. Daniels whispered, I hear them. Just that. I hear them. He didn't mean the enemy. He meant the dead. The diary says, I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because I hear them too. And even now, at 97, with the world quiet around me, I still hear them some nights. Not voices, not words, just presence. Memory that refuses to stay buried. The lieutenant came over. He looked down at Daniels for a long moment. Then he crouched beside him. Not to comfort him, not to command him, but to simply exist beside him. That's something they never teach you in training. Sometimes the only leadership that matters is presence. Daniels eventually stopped shaking. His breath slowed. His hands dropped from his ears. He didn't speak again for the rest of the night. He just sat there, small, tired and young. So painfully young. The forest never slept. The trees creaked, leaves rustled. A distant owl called, sounding too mournful for nature. Every noise felt like a threat. When dawn finally came, it didn't feel like relief, just transition. Night turned into day, fear changed shape, but it did not fade. The diary ends the entry like this. Night does not bring rest in war. Night only brings darkness to match what we carry inside. We stood, we shouldered our rifles, we moved again. And the war moved with us. We kept moving at dawn. The forest thinned and the ground became uneven. Rocky fields cut by hedgerows and low stone walls. The kind of landscape that forces you to move bent low, like you're trying to hide from God. The air was colder that morning. You could see each breath, small clouds disappearing fast. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so normal after everything the day before. Birds flew, grass swayed, the sun rose. It felt like we were intruding on a world that no longer had room for us. The diary says, I feel like a shape cut out of the world, not part of it. And that was the closest I came to describing the emptiness that had started to take root inside. We were ordered to take a crossroads, a small one, just a dirt road meeting another dirt road. Not a town, not a base, just a point on a map. It seemed meaningless, but the war was made of meaningless places that became important because men died securing them. There was a barn nearby, tall, weathered, paint peeling, doors open. We approached it slowly, rifles ready. Every sound felt like it could be a gunshot in disguise. The barn smelled like dust and old hay, and something else, something metallic and faint that I recognized too quickly. Blood. Inside we found a body. Not a soldier, a farmer, maybe 50, maybe older, hard to tell. His hands were rough, the hands of a man who worked the land. His eyes were still open. His throat had been cut, not clean, not careful. A cut made by someone who didn't care how long it took to kill him. The diary says, I felt nothing, and I remember how true that was. No horror, no anger, no grief, not even surprise. Death had become so expected that even a murdered man in a barn felt like another item in a long list. I didn't like that. I still don't. I wish I had cried for him. I wish I had felt anything at all. A few of the others crossed themselves. One whispered, God forgive us for walking through this. But I don't think any of us believed God was anywhere near that place. God had left the battlefield long before we arrived. We secured the crossroads and waited. Waiting was worse than fighting. In fighting, the fear was focused. It had direction. It had something to attach itself to. But waiting? Waiting meant fear spread like water, filling every space inside you, seeping into cracks you didn't know you had. Carter still hadn't spoken. He walked where we walked, stopped where we stopped, ate when we ate, but his eyes were hollow, like a house with the windows blown out. Daniel stayed close to me, always just a little behind, like he thought if he touched my shadow, he might survive. I didn't feel strong enough to be anyone's shelter, but I didn't tell him to stay away. Maybe I needed someone to protect as much as he needed someone to follow. Maybe it kept both of us steady. Then it happened. We heard movement along the road, not marching, not coordinated, just footsteps, slow, uneven, the kind a drunk man makes or a wounded one. We raised our rifles, every muscle tight, every breath held. A German soldier came around the corner, hands empty, no rifle, no helmet. His face was pale and drawn. His left arm hung limp, blood dried on his sleeve. He looked as tired as we were, not desperate, just done. He saw us, stopped, looked at each of us in turn. Then he raised his good hand slowly. Not high, just enough so we knew he wasn't reaching for anything. The diary says, he looked like a boy who had finally understood something too late, and I believe that now. He had the face of someone who had realized that war was not a stage for glory, but a furnace that melted everything it touched. No one moved. No one spoke here. The lieutenant whispered, "Hold your fire." The German tried to say something. His voice cracked. He tried again. The word came out rough, broken. "Bitter, please." Daniel's rifle fired. The shot echoed across the empty fields. The German fell backward, his body folding slowly, like a coat slipping from a hook. Dust rose where he hit the ground. Then nothing. No sound, no movement. We all turned to look at Daniel's. His rifle was still raised. His hands were shaking. His chest rose and fell too fast, too hard. His eyes were wide and empty, like something had cracked inside him and spilled everything out. He whispered, he would have killed us later, but his voice didn't carry conviction, just fear, just justification, just survival trying to explain itself. The lieutenant didn't yell, didn't scold, didn't condemn. He just nodded once, a slow, tired nod, because he knew, we all knew. The diary ends the entry with, "That was the moment something in me turned off. I didn't feel horror. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel anything. And I think that scared me more than anything else. War doesn't turn boys into men. It turns boys into survivors. And survivors learn how to turn their hearts silent when the world gets too loud. That silence followed me home. It never left. We reached a small farmhouse near midday. Stone walls, a red roof half collapsed, and a single tree in the yard with branches shaped like reaching fingers. Smoke drifted faintly from the chimney. That meant one thing. Someone was inside. The lieutenant raised his fist, and we stopped. Silence spread through us like a command. We moved slowly, not cautious like hunters, wary like men who already knew too well what could wait behind a door. The diary says, "I don't want to see what's inside, but I go anyway." That was how everything in the war felt. You moved not because you were brave, but because stopping was impossible. The door was cracked open. A white sheet hung over the entrance like someone had tried to make a curtain, but didn't finish. White sheets are supposed to feel clean, safe, domestic. In war, white means surrender, or death, or something in between. We entered. The house smelled like dried herbs, and old wood, the smell of a place where life had once been slow. The kind of home where someone made soup on cold days. The kind of home where the world outside might have once felt distant. In the main room, we saw them. 3 bodies, laid out side by side, covered with white sheets. Not soldiers, not fighters. Civilians. A mother, a father, a child. You know these things without being told. The way bodies are arranged says everything. The father in the middle, the mother to the left, the child to the right. The child's sheet was smaller, too small. No blood on the sheets, no visible wounds, just stillness. That was worse. Someone had cared enough to cover them, but not enough to stay. The diary says, "There is no sound in my head, only weight, and that weight has never left me." Daniel stared at the smallest sheet. He didn't blink. His fingers twitched near his rifle, not reaching for it, not letting it go, just trembling there, like the weapon was the only thing holding him to the ground. We checked the rest of the house, slowly, carefully, each room like a held breath. In the kitchen, we found plates still set on the table, a meal that had been interrupted, bread broken, soup cooled, chairs pushed back. The lives here had stopped mid-sentence. The lieutenant stood for a long time looking at the table. Then he pulled out a chair and sat, not like a soldier, like a man, a very tired man. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Outside, Carter stood by the doorway, still empty, still silent. The wind tugged at his sleeves. His eyes were unfocused, like his mind had already walked away and left his body behind. I found a toy on the floor of the child's room, a wooden horse, painted blue. The paint chipped on one side. I held it in my hand. It felt small, fragile, too real. The diary says, I put the toy back, and I remember the exact moment I did. Gently, like placing something sacred. We heard footsteps outside, not many, 3, maybe 4. We froze. The lieutenant signalled us into position, rifles raised, eyes sharp, hearts doing their own violent rhythm in our chests. A group of villagers approached. Women, 2 old, 1 young. They carried nothing but grief on their faces, the kind of grief that has moved past crying into something deeper, something that no longer has sound. They saw us, but they didn't stop. They walked past us and into the house. One of the older women knelt beside the 3 white sheets and rested her forehead on the smallest one. No wailing, no gasp, no dramatic collapse, just the quiet surrender of someone who had run out of ways to fight the world. We lowered our rifles. The young woman looked at us, her eyes hollow but steady. No blame, no accusation, just acknowledgement that war had passed through this place and left its mark, and that none of us, not them, not us, had chosen any of this. She said one sentence in French, quiet, even. See what your world has done. Not you, your world. The world that trained boys to carry rifles. The world that taught armies to claim land by turning it into graves. The world that let death become routine. No one answered her. What answer could there be? The diary reads, I wanted to say I was sorry, but my throat would not open. Maybe because sorry wasn't enough. Maybe because sorry would have broken me. The villagers stayed with the bodies. We left the house and moved on. Not because we didn't care, but because the war didn't care whether we cared. We walked down the road, away from the house with the white sheets, away from the quiet grief we had witnessed, away from the reminder that the war was not only killing soldiers, it was killing the world. Daniels walked beside me. He didn't look back, but his voice, small, thin, exhausted, broke the silence between us. He said, "I don't know how to go home after this." The diary ends the entry with, "I didn't answer him, because I didn't know how to go home either." And the truth is, I never really did. We left the house behind us without speaking, without looking over our shoulders, without acknowledging what had just taken place, because in war there are some things you have to step away from, or they will anchor your feet to the ground and drown you in your own chest. The road ahead was narrow, dirt pressed flat by horses and carts that probably hadn't passed through for days, maybe weeks. The sky was pale, too bright, almost white, as if the sun was trying to wash the blood from the world, but couldn't find enough light. The air was thick and still, holding every sound like it was afraid to let go. Our boots scraped the ground. No rhythm, just motion. Something to prove we were still alive. Daniels walked close to me again, always just to my right, like a shadow that needed to stay connected to something real. Carter followed behind us, his steps slow but steady, like his body remembered movement, even though his mind didn't anymore. The lieutenant walked ahead, map in his hand, jaw clenched tight enough to grind down teeth. We stopped reacting to bodies the way we once did. We passed two in a ditch, German uniforms, rifles fallen just out of reach. Neither of us looked long. We didn't stop. We didn't check pulses. We didn't remove tags. We didn't even absorb the sight. Our eyes moved over them, the way eyes move over stones and branches. Not disrespect, just a mind already overloaded, too full to take in anything else without collapsing. The diary says, "We don't look back anymore. Looking back means remembering. Remembering means drowning." And yes, that is the truth the war carved into us. We reached another clearing where the road split. One direction toward a cluster of farmhouses, the other into another patch of woods. The lieutenant paused. The silence was heavy enough that even the wind seemed careful not to disturb it. He pointed to the forest. We didn't question, we didn't suggest, we didn't ask. The idea of choice was gone. Choice is a luxury of men who are safe. We were no longer those men. The trees closed around us like a door shutting. Shade covered us but offered no comfort, only dimness and the sense that eyes could be watching from any direction. The ground was scattered with broken branches and leaves, and every sound we made felt too loud, as if the world itself was holding its breath and we were interrupting something ancient and patient. Daniels whispered my name once, just once. I didn't answer. I didn't look at him, but I heard everything in that whisper. Fear trying to stay silent, youth trying not to disappear, a boy begging the war not to erase him completely. Up ahead, a gunshot cracked. One single shot, sharp, clean, close. We dropped, automatic, our bodies trained now to react before thought. We listened. Nothing. No follow-up shot, no shouting, no movement. Just one sound, hanging in the trees like something unfinished. The lieutenant signalled forward. We moved slowly, rifles up, stepping with the deliberate slowness of men who understood that the next 6 feet could be life or death. We found him near a fallen tree, an American soldier sitting with his back against the trunk, rifle on the ground beside him, helmet off, a hole through his chest, still fresh, blood dark but not dried. His eyes were open, his expression calm, too calm, like the moment before sleep, just before the mind lets go. And then we saw it. His hand was still holding a photograph. A woman smiling, a child in her lap, both looking into the camera with the trust of people who believed the world could not break them. The diary says, "We didn't search his pockets, we didn't take his tags, we didn't touch his picture, we let him keep what he had left." And that is true. Some things you do not take from a man, even after everything else has been stolen. Daniels knelt in front of him. He stayed there a long time, longer than the war usually allowed. No one hurried him. No one ordered him up. No one spoke, because we understood that this was not grief, it was recognition. A mirror held up to the future he feared he would not reach. Then Daniels did something I will remember until my mind dissolves. He closed the man's eyes with 2 fingers, gently. The The way someone closes the eyes of someone they love. No prayers, no words, just respect, quiet, human respect. We left him there, beneath the tree, with his picture and his peace. We moved on. We kept going. The diary ends the entry. We learned today that the war does not just kill the living. It waits inside the living. It sits in their lungs. It settles in their blood. It waits to come home with them. And I know now, 78 years later, that the diary was right. The war didn't end when we survived it. The war came home with us. It lived in our sleep. It lived in our hands. It lived in our silence. And it never truly left. We kept moving even though our bodies were slowing, even though our minds were thinning to threads, even though every step felt like dragging ourselves through something thick and invisible. The war didn't care how tired we were. The war didn't pause so we could breathe. The war kept us moving, the way the tide keeps the ocean moving, without thought, without reason, without mercy. The lieutenant gave commands, but they didn't sound like words anymore. Not really. They were movements, gestures, a tilt of the head, a hand lifted, a finger pointed. We understood each other, not by speech but by exhaustion, that had become a shared language. We saw smoke ahead, thick, black, rising from behind a low ridge, not the sharp smoke of artillery, the slow smoke of something burning that was not supposed to burn. Civilian fire, village fire. Our breathing tightened without needing to speak. We climbed the ridge slowly, every muscle ready, even though there was almost nothing left in us to ready. The diary says, I no longer think about being afraid. Fear is too heavy to carry now. And that was the truth. Fear had been replaced with something simpler, continuation. We reached the ridge and looked down. Another village, but this one was still burning. Flames crawled along rooftops, slow and hungry, not the fast, violent kind, but the kind that consumes everything with patience. No movement, no shouts, no orders, just crackling wood and smoke that rose into a sky that had already seen too much. The first thing I noticed was not the fire, it was the silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm that took everything with it. The smell hit next. Burned wheat, burned cloth, burned flesh. A smell the world never forgets, even if a man tries to. We approached slowly, rifles up, eyes hollow, hearts already bracing. The houses were still standing, but their windows had melted. The doors hung open like mouths trying to scream, but having no air left. We stepped into the village square, bodies, some covered, some not, a few still sitting, as if mid-conversation, except there was no conversation anymore, only permanence. We were too late to stop this, too late to change anything, too late to matter. The diary says, arriving after tragedy is worse than being inside it, because there is no purpose to the pain, only witness. Daniel stopped walking. He stared at a figure near a well, a small figure, a child, kneeling, head bowed, hands still holding a bucket as if frozen in time. The bucket had spilled, water mixing with ash on the stone ground. He didn't move. None of us did. We just stood there, in a silence so thick it felt like the world itself was grieving. Then we saw movement. Not much, just a flicker, a shadow in the doorway of a barn. We raised our rifles. Slowly, not out of fear, but because that was what we did now. Someone stepped out, a German soldier, not holding a rifle, not wearing a helmet, just a man. His uniform stained, his eyes hollow, just like ours. He looked at us the way we looked at him, empty recognition. Not enemies, just two sides of something bigger than either of us. For a long moment no one moved, no one breathed, no one wanted to start whatever would happen next. The lieutenant raised his rifle, not quickly, slowly, deliberately. The German soldier did not raise his hands. He did not step back. He did not run. He simply lowered his head, like a man who had already made his decision long before we arrived. Daniel stepped forward, not to shoot, to see, to understand. The German looked up at him. Their eyes met. Two boys. Two terrified, emptied, broken boys. The German opened his mouth. No words came, just breath. And then Daniels lowered his rifle. The lieutenant didn't speak, he didn't need to. Something had shifted, something subtle, something that did not undo anything, did not heal anything, did not change the war, but something that made the world feel, for one brief moment, like there was still a difference between choosing to live and choosing to kill. The German took one slow step backward, then another. Then he disappeared into the smoke. No one followed him, no one fired, no one spoke. The diary says, "I don't know if mercy means anything in war, but today it felt like remembering we were human for just one breath." And maybe that was all it was. One breath, one moment. Then the lieutenant finally spoke. "We move," he said. Not harsh, not angry, just tired. So tired that the word barely carried weight. We left the burning village the same way we had left the others. Quiet, steady, carrying nothing and everything at the same time. The fire crackled behind us. The smoke rose. The world continued breaking, and we continued walking. Not because we believed in victory, not because we believed in purpose, but because stopping meant falling, and falling meant never standing again. That was the day we stopped looking back, because there was no space left inside us to hold anything more. When the war finally ended, there was no moment where someone said, "It's over, you can go home now." It ended the way exhaustion ends a body, slowly, quietly, with no strength left to announce its own conclusion. One day we were advancing, the next day we stopped. We didn't cheer, we didn't cry, we didn't celebrate. We just sat down wherever we were standing, because our legs had nothing left to give. I remember sitting in the dirt with my rifle across my knees and realizing, for the first time in months, that I didn't need to hold it anymore. I let it fall. It hit the ground with a dull sound, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not grief, just an emptiness so wide I thought it might swallow me whole. We were shipped home in waves. Replacements went first, veterans last. The ones who had been there longest had to wait the longest. I suppose the logic was that we were used to waiting. When my ship finally left Europe, I stood on the deck and watched the shore grow smaller, fading into grey, into memory, into something that felt unreal even as I watched it disappear. Daniel stood beside me. His shoulders were thinner now, his face older. He was still only 19. We didn't speak. There were no words left between us, just the silent knowledge that we had witnessed each other's breaking, and that kind of knowledge sits deeper than anything spoken. When we reached the harbour, there were crowds, flags, signs, people shouting and clapping and crying. They called us heroes, they threw confetti, they played music, they spoke of honour and sacrifice and pride, and I felt like I was watching them from behind glass. The cheering didn't reach me. The music sounded far away. Everything was bright, too bright, as if the world had been painted over in colours I no longer recognised. A woman ran to a man beside me and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his uniform like she was returning to life. I watched them and felt as though I was intruding on something I could no longer understand. When I walked home, my mother opened the door before I knocked. She knew. I don't know how. Some mothers just do. She put her hands on my face and said my name, and I stood there, knowing I should collapse into her arms, knowing I should cry, knowing I should feel something. But the war had sealed everything inside me, locked behind a door I didn't know how to open. She hugged me. I didn't move, not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't. I was still in Normandy. I would be in Normandy for decades. The diary says, "They say we survived." I don't know what that means, and I didn't. Surviving wasn't living. Surviving was just continuing to breathe. I tried to build a life. People do that. They stack days like bricks, hoping a home forms around them. I worked. I laughed when others laughed. I shook hands. I married. I held my first child in my arms and felt something break open inside me. Not pain, not joy, but a reminder that life could still move forward, even when you couldn't. At night, I woke gasping, hands clenched, heart racing, the taste of salt in my mouth. I heard waves, I heard gunfire, I heard the quiet sound a man makes when he dies. I learned how to sleep sitting up, I learned how to smile without letting it reach my eyes. I learned how to live with ghosts. Years passed, decades. I grew older. My hair turned white. My hands shook, but not from memory anymore, just age. The world moved on. New wars came. New boys grew into men on battlefields that didn't look like mine, but felt exactly the same. The past didn't soften. It just settled, heavy, permanent, like a stone at the bottom of a river. And then my daughter found the diary. She brought it to me like a relic, like something important. And it is the only piece of that 19-year-old boy that still exists, in full. The words are raw, uneven, written in fear, written in sand and blood and salt and youth. When I opened it again after 78 years, I expected to feel distance, nostalgia, maybe sorrow. But I felt recognition. I saw him, the boy I was, the boy who wrote, "I don't want to die in shaky ink," while waves turned red around him. The boy who held Tommy's hand while the ocean carried him away. The boy who killed quietly in a forest because the world demanded it. The boy who walked through villages where the living had already left the world behind. The boy who came home but didn't return. I am not ashamed of him. I no longer fear him. I sit with him now. We share the same body. We share the same memory. He is not gone. I did not outlive him. We carried each other here. The diary ends with one final line, a line I had forgotten, a line I wrote when I was 19, covered in sand, shaking, exhausted, terrified, but still breathing. If I survive this, I will remember them. And I did. Every one, every face, every voice, every breath that didn't return to a body, every life that ended before it could begin. I am 97 years old, but in my mind on quiet nights, when the world is gentle and still, I am still 19 in Normandy, and I remember.